Tuyết Mai xin trân trọng kính chào quý vị. Kính thưa quý vị, hôm nay Tuyết Mai hân hạnh gửi đến quý vị một vài hình ảnh về Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ ở Việt Nam Savid Shear gặp gỡ cộng đồng Việt Nam ở vùng Hoa Tịnh Đốn, được tổ chức vào lúc 7 giờ chiều ngày 16 tháng 8 năm 2013 tại tư gia của bác sĩ Nguyễn Quốc Quân. Kính mời quý vị theo dõi một vài hình ảnh của chúng tôi hôm nay.
The Vietnamese American community really is of fundamental importance to the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. You have come a long way. You have a very, very strong voice through your representatives in Congress, through the media, and through Vietnamese in Vietnam. And you are listened to by we in the government. You are listened to by the Vietnamese. You have a very strong voice, and you are very, very important to us. And believe me, we listen to you. And your views shape what we do. And we pay very close attention to what's going on back here. And I was here about a year and a half ago, shortly after I began my tour in Vietnam. And in May, I made a tour of Orange County, San Francisco, and San Jose, engaging with the Vietnamese American community there as well. So I want to continue to stay in close touch for the rest of my tour here, because again, your voice is very, very important to us. You've probably heard me say this before, but I want to say it again. We want a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam that respects human rights and the rule of law. And we pursue this goal via 4 avenues. One is we want to strengthen bilateral economic and trade ties, and we're doing that through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership does not just have economic significance for Vietnam and the United States, but it also has strategic significance for both countries, because once Vietnam is a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they'll know that they have a reliable relationship with with the strongest economy in the world, and they won't have to depend solely on other regional economies for their prosperity. They can achieve prosperity through stronger bilateral economic relations with the United States. So this is a strategic agreement as much as it is an economic agreement. A second avenue via which we pursue this goal is through stronger diplomatic coordination on such issues as the South China Sea. This is, of course, a critically important issue for the Vietnamese. It's a critically important issue for ASEAN and for the region. You've probably all heard what we've said, what our position is. We want this issue resolved peacefully through diplomacy, and we want it done in such a way that it preserves freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. And we work very closely with the Vietnamese on this issue, as well as issues relating particularly to the Mekong River, damming on the Mekong River, and the environmental quality of the Mekong River that's being affected by climate change. It's people in the South are quite alarmed by possible environmental damage to the Mekong Delta. So we're consulting with the Vietnamese on this as well. A third avenue via which we pursue this goal is through strong people-to-people relations. And we focus particularly on the areas of education, health, and environment. There are over 15,000 Vietnamese students in the United States right now. I think that's the 7th largest. Vietnam is the 7th largest provider of foreign students in the United States. It's one of our best exports, and those students, sooner or later, as Vietnam's economy develops, are going to start going back. And they're going to take with them not only the education they received here, but they're going to take back their experiences they had here, they're going to take back their values, they're going to take back what they heard from you, the Vietnamese American community. And they're going to be, over time, they're going to be shaping the future of Vietnam very, very much. we work with the Vietnamese on health, particularly in fighting HIV/AIDS, but also in building the overall Vietnamese health infrastructure. We work with Vietnamese in the area of environment and climate change. But there's a fourth avenue via which we pursue this goal, and I'm not mentioning it last because it's the least important. I'm mentioning it last because it's related to every other of those avenues we pursue, and that's human rights. We pursue the improvement of human rights in Vietnam very, very vigorously and very, very energetically. And Michael worked exclusively on human rights in the political section of my embassy for 4 years. We relied on him very heavily to do what we wanted to do on human rights, and that man is a hero. TPP is extremely important. For example, TPP is extremely important to both sides, but we will not be able to generate sufficient political support in Washington or in America as a whole for the Trans-Pacific Partnership without demonstrable progress in human rights. And we've gone beyond this, and we've spoken to the Vietnamese in very specific ways about what they can do to improve human rights, including releasing more political prisoners, releasing all political prisoners, including improving the conditions of worship, including the improvements in freedom of religion. We have asked them to ratify the Convention Against Torture, and they committed to doing that in the joint statement released recently during President Sang's visit here to Washington. So we have engaged the Vietnamese in a variety of very practical, pragmatic, specific efforts they can do to improve human rights and improve rule of law in Vietnam. And we've seen some modest forward movement, We had American citizen activist Richard Nguyen released early in the year. We had Lê Công Dinh released early in the year. We've seen an uptick in the number of church registrations. The Vietnamese government's relationship with the Vatican is improving, and I would hope that the representative of the Vatican, now resident in Singapore, will soon be resident in Hanoi. So we've seen modest improvements, but we have lots of work to do with the Vietnamese, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to keep doing that work, and hopefully we'll see in time an overall improvement in the human rights situation in Vietnam. I'm not going to whitewash the situation there. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be great next year, but this is like someone once said that politics is like drilling through a hard piece of wood, right? And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, and you don't get a lot of progress in a short time. So President Sang's recent visit to Washington, it was a very important visit, partly because we wanted the Vietnamese to make a strong public statement supporting the conclusion of Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations by the end of this year. But we also wanted to make a very strong statement to the Vietnamese about human rights. President Sang met with President Obama in the Oval Office. They discussed human rights for a lengthy period during the meeting in two contexts. One is a general context in which they exchanged views on human rights. The other context was when the Vietnamese raised their interest in our lifting of the ban on the sale of lethal weapons to Vietnam. The President said, if you want us to do that, you're going to have to improve your human rights practices. He said that very firmly. Again, we're working on better U.S.-Vietnam relations. We're working on better human rights conditions in Vietnam. And what we want, in the end, is a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam that respects human rights and the rule of law.
Thank you, Ambassador Shear. Mr. Scott Busby, he's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor.
Ambassador Shear has made crystal clear how important human rights is to our relationship with Vietnam. Indeed, both the President and the Secretary of State made clear to President Song that the relationship with Vietnam cannot improve unless there's also improvement in human rights. And that means free access to the internet. One of the concerns that we've raised is this recent internet decree that limits access to social media. We're also very concerned about the crackdown on bloggers, those people in Vietnam who have been exercising their right to free expression on the internet. That's of concern to us. We have been speaking out about that. And Ambassador Shear has already talked about our interest in greater religious freedom and in releasing those people who are in prison for having exercised their fundamental human rights. So let me confirm to you, as Ambassador Shear has already said, that human rights is a central part of our relationship. It will remain a central part of our relationship, and we will continue to make that point to Vietnamese officials whenever and wherever we meet them. Thank you.
Thưa quý vị, vừa xem qua một vài hình ảnh của Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam, Savid Shear, tiếp xúc cùng cộng đồng Việt Nam vùng Hoa Tịnh Đốn ở tư gia của bác sĩ Nguyễn Quốc Quân. Chương trình phóng sự của chúng tôi tới đây chấm dứt. Chúc Mai xin hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình đặc biệt kỳ tới.